All you have learned so far relates to working with a local repository. It is possible to associate your local repository with one or more remote repositories. In this video, you will learn how to work with remote repositories. To find out the remote repositories associated with a local repository, you will use the git remote command. For example, to find out the remote repositories associated with the local repository for working directory, I will use the git remote command. There is currently no remote repository associated with the local repository for working directory. Hence, no remote repository have been listed following the git remote command. You can associate one or more existing remote repositories with a local repository if you use the git remote add command. When you use the git remote add command, you will name the remote repository and provide the URL to the remote repository. But we do not have a remote repository to associate with the local repository for working directory yet. So let's go ahead to create one on GitHub. One of the sites where you can create your remote repository is github.com. You could also decide to use bitbucket.com. Bitbucket.com also allows you to create remote repositories. If you do not have an account with github.com yet, you can go ahead to sign up for one. I have an existing account, so I'm going to sign in to my account. To sign in, I'll provide my username and password. On github.com, it is very easy to create a remote repository. All you have to do is click on the new button for repositories. Provide a name for the repository. I'll call this demo repo. You can provide an optional description. You have the option to decide whether you want this remote repository to be public or private. So if it is public, anyone can see this repository and you choose who can commit. But if it is private, you choose who can see and commit to this repository. You can decide to initialize this repository with a readme, and when you're done, click create repository. So the remote repository have been created and it's called demo repo. This is the URL for demo repo, and you can use this command to associate demo repo with any local repository. Since we now have a remote repository to associate with the local repository for working directory, let's go ahead to create the association. I'll paste the command git remote add origin and the URL for the remote repo. So the name of this remote repo is origin. If I run the git remote command again, then origin is listed. This origin could have been any other name. Okay, it is also possible to list the URL for the remote repositories associated with the local repository for working directory. So to do that, I'll run the git remote command but with a -v option. So that lists the URLs for the remote repositories associated with the local repository for working directory. So we've got at least one remote repository associated with the local repository for working directory. What we can now do is push the local repository to the remote site. To do that, I'll run the git push command. When you run the git push command, you will provide the name of the remote repository you want to push to. In this case, it is origin, and the branch of the remote repository you want to push to. In this case, again, it is master. Okay, so let's run this command. This command will push the local repository to the remote repository. Okay, so that's done. Let's view the remote repository. So this is the remote repository. All I'll do is click on demo repo there, and you can see file a.txt, which is the only file that have been committed to the database associated with working directory so far. If we open this file, then it should have this is a sample file for demonstration. Remember that although the remote repository acts as a backup for your local repository, it also provides the opportunity for you to work with one or more collaborators. For example, it is possible for changes to take place on the remote repository. That means the local repository will be out of date with the remote repository. For instance, I'll edit this file a.txt. When I'm done editing this file, I'll just scroll down here. I can add a commit message and click on commit changes. This will update the remote repository. With this done, I'll go back to the local repository. We know that the local repository is out of date with the remote repository. In fact, we can say the remote repository is ahead of the local repository. So, to update the local repository, I'll run the git fetch command. I have provided the name of the remote repository that I want Git to fetch from. Before I run this command, let's open file a.txt, and you can see it does not contain the text that was added in the remote repository. So I'll close that. Let's run git fetch origin. The local repository now has all the data from the remote repository, although the um, contents of working directory have not yet been updated with the data from the remote repository. It is possible to view the data from the remote repository on another branch, a new branch, with the checkout command. You will run the git checkout command with a -b option and provide the name of a new branch. I'll just call that new branch. If you run this, then another branch, a new branch, will be created which will contain the data from the remote repository. You can then view the data for the remote repository on new branch and decide whether or not to merge new branch to branch master. It is also possible to run the git pull command, which will not only get the data from the remote site but also update local files with the contents of the remote repository. I'll run the git pull command. Okay, sorry, I need to provide the name of the remote site, that is origin, and the branch is master, so let's add master there. So I'll run that. Okay, so that's done. If I open file A on working directory now, file a.txt, so it has the same content as the file in as the most recent version in the remote repository. Well, if you care about the content of your working directory, then you're most likely going to use the fetch command, git fetch command, so that you can check out the data for the remote repository and decide whether or not you want to merge changes. But if you do not care about the content of your working directory, you simply want to update your working directory with the most recent version of the remote repository, then you will use the git pull command. In this video, starting with a local repository, you learned how to work with a remote repository. In the next video, you will learn how to start with a remote repository.